Lara, thank you so much for joining me. I know that you have been doing interviews back to back, so I'm hopeful that some of my questions will be a little bit different, but we'll give it a shot. So thank you so much for joining me. Lara, one of the things that I've enjoyed probably the most about your acting, and you have a diverse acting portfolio, has been your comic timing. From No Entry to, it's interesting because there's a lot of critics of Sing is Bling, but I think my favorite part of that movie was you. And Chalo Dili is going to be probably one of my favorite films of all time. But I think it's the comic timing that you have. What does it take to get comic timing right, specifically in a dramedy like Kaun Banegi Shikharwati?
Well, extremely challenging to say the least. You know, when you're doing comedy in a scene where there are only 2 or 3 characters in a frame, you know, it's easy to do because you find a rhythm, you know where each person is going. When it's 6, 7, 8, when it's a large ensemble of actors, it really boils down. I mean, timing is key because each one has lines coming. You know, you've got to make sure that they land with perfect timing, because otherwise it's a very easy hit or miss. You know, it can go flat really easily, just as easily as it can actually find its mark. So that is a very challenging part, especially when you're doing large ensemble comedy pieces, of which I've had a fair share of experience because of doing films like No Entry and because of doing films like Houseful. You know, but when I'm doing a film like Houseful, I've got incredible actors like Akshay Kumar and Ritesh Deshmukh, who are in their own right, you know, amazing comic actors. You know, even in No Entry, when you're doing scenes with Fardeen, with Anil Kapoor, with Salman. Over here, I mean, apart from Nasir Saab and Raghubir Yadav, who are really, really, you know, experienced veteran actors, you've had, you know, 4 other women who haven't worked with each other ever before, you know. So, I mean, I was very excited to work with Soha, with Kritika, with Anya, but I've never actually been exposed to them before, never actually worked with them before. So that was an interesting dynamic, because not only are we bringing in just, you know, comic relief, but we're also playing siblings. So it was incredible to also get that bond, you know, completely right. And we're not playing siblings who like each other, which is even trickier. So there's a lot that goes in building a character and building a scene. And when you see it on screen, when you see people laughing, when we've had, you know, the response to the trailer where everyone says it's fun and it's quirky and it's humorous, it makes it all worthwhile.
Actually, that leads to 2 separate questions I have. One is, of course, about having a natural chemistry, because there's 4 sisters, and all 4 sisters are very different from each other. All of them seem to have their quirks. They look different in the sense of the way that their personalities may be. But at the same time, I feel as though there's a natural chemistry to sisters who like each other and get along with each other. I think that's perhaps a little bit easier to play. And then there's a natural chemistry you have to have where sisters clearly know each other, these 4 sisters, obviously they're related, but they don't like each other. So what was the challenge like? I know you've talked a little bit about the comic timing specifically, but what was the challenge like to make sure that the 4 of you looked like sisters, acted like sisters, so you would know each other's secrets and childhood memories and all of that, but at the same time you just did not get along? What was that process like?
So I think that honestly, that boils down to your prep work that you go through before you actually get onto set and shoot. So, you know, we sat down with bound scripts. We had really well fleshed out characters. Writer Ananya Banerjee, you know, kind of has lived with these characters. It's very evident when you actually, you know, sit down and encounter them for the first time, that she's lived with these characters and their quirks in her head for a really long time. So she's layered them, you know, she's described them in such a way where when you're reading these characters, you know instantly where each one has come from, what the character's backstory is, why they behave in a certain way, what way that they are today. What is that little niggling thing that you can scratch, and that's going to draw, you know, a response out of that specific character. So I think for us, that sort of process began on the writing table. You know, when we started out doing our table reads together, which we did a couple of times before we actually got onto set in Mandava and Rajasthan. We had the opportunity of building those relationships. You know, so for the first time that we were meeting each other as actors, we had a chance to, you know, play out those lines, play out those scenes, see the way that they were working, what didn't work. How would I react to somebody knowing that that was the space that they were coming from? So yeah, every project has a different process that you sort of kind of go through to build those characters. For this particular project, this is the process that was very, very tantamount before you actually threw actors in, and I mean, you grabbed a bunch of actors and threw them together on a big set and say, okay, let's go. Yeah.
Sort of a follow-up of that question. The four sisters are obviously very different from each other, but if you had the choice of taking one sister out on a coffee date today, either as Lara or as your character, which one intrigued you the most? This is besides the character that you play. Which one intrigued you the most that you would go out for coffee with her, and what were the questions that you'd ask her?
Well, if I was coming from the space of Devyani asking any one of her sisters out, I think it would possibly be Gayatri. I think also as children, they were the closest, sort of to each other. They're the closest in age, but they're obviously estranged. They've fallen apart. And there's so much that's happened in their lives that when they actually, both of them come face to face, it's a bit of a shock to see how much has changed for both of them in life. And I in person as well, Soha and I are pretty close to each other in age. She's an incredible personality on her own. She's quirky as hell. She's super fun. She's super intelligent. And we don't just see each other for a bunch of coffees. We have quite a few coffee and wine evenings that also end in loud yelling matches over board games. It's just that it's all of us and not just one or two. So I think that's been the wonderful joy of the takeaway of this project, the fact that it spilled over to all our real lives as well. And I think what we went through shooting in the kind of environment that we shot in as well, a rather stressful time for everybody, and literally having just each other to depend on because we were in such tight bubbles. We didn't really have family members or anything that were allowed to visit on set. That in a way we kind of became each other's confidants and support systems and things like that. And that I think really worked as well.
Amazing. I have another question I want to ask you about your own character. One of the things that I like is in today's day and age, we're seeing female characters that are more layered, and there can be things that are unlikable about them on screen, which I quite like. But what's the one thing you loved about your character, and what's the one thing you hated? With the caveat that, with sort of the understanding that you perhaps don't have to love your character no matter what as an actor, or do you?
No, you don't. And I think that's the fun of actually being an actor, where you can actually, you don't have to constantly make your character likable on screen. The audience doesn't have to constantly love or like you. And I think that's the liberty that OTT content actually gives you, because you're holding that character for a much longer time on screen as well. But if I had to choose one thing that I do love about Devyani, is the fact that for her, family has always been absolutely paramount. I mean, she comes from a space where she unfortunately was the one that had to grow up overnight being the eldest when their mother passes away. So she sort of stepped into a mother's role far earlier in life than she would have liked to have. And ended up taking care of her own sisters, all her sisters, because her father was incapable of doing so. So that's always been her grouse with her dad, that he just never stepped up to the task and left these four little girls to fend for themselves. And even when she comes back to the palace, she's got her own family, she's got her own husband, her own children, and all the things that she actually does is purely because she's trying to save or protect them. And I think so that for her is the one thing that I really like. And also the one thing that I resonate with Devyani the most. I mean, that family is, absolutely tantamount. The one thing that I would say that I didn't like maybe about her is the fact that she is extremely bossy. She's just used to having her own way. She's used to the others falling in line, so she loves being in control. She's a bit of a control freak. She hates it when things go out of control and everybody's not towing the line. Drives her absolutely insane. And when I mean insane, I mean off the handle insane. So yeah.
Last question for you, Lara. When you think about the experience that you've had, you talk about the fact that you were shooting in such tight circumstances, family wasn't really allowed to visit, and obviously such are the times that we're in even today, unfortunately. But I find that when I speak to most actors, one of the things that they always say is each project sort of, or each character sort of leaves a mark on them. Perhaps not a life-changing mark, or perhaps not a mark where their personality changes. But what's the one mark that Kaun Banegi Shikharwati has left on you?
Well, I think it's given me. It's the first time that I've ever had the opportunity of portraying royalty on screen, right? And when you portray royalty on screen, it's a different ball game. It's not just pretending to be somebody who is royalty, but when you're actually portraying a character like this, you have to play it like you were raised from birth to, to kind of be a certain kind of a body language, to be a certain kind of mentality. And that for me was a pretty challenging aspect of building this character. There's a certain way that they walk, the way they held themselves, the way that they addressed people around them, the way that they were addressed, so the way that they would respond back. I love the fact, I was reading an article which said that for the show Succession, they actually had a wealth consultant on set, and the wealth consultant was literally there to tell them what the body language and the mentality of the really, really super old wealth is, how they would act, even getting out of choppers, getting into cars, what their body language would be like, how the really super wealthy would just be, the things that they just absolutely take for granted. And so it was really interesting. I mean, we didn't have anything of that sort on this set, but it was getting under the psyche of the character. And I think when I left, I think that's the one thing that kind of stayed with me. You step into a world that's so very different from the one that you inhabit on a day-to-day basis. So it was very interesting to have an insight into that, and take a little bit of that away with you.
Amazing. Lara, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for having this interview with Bollywood Film Fame Canada. I'm really looking forward to Kaun Banegi Shikharwati on ZEE5, and of course, your lovely performance. I'm sure that it will likely be one of my favorites again. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Armin. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Take care. Bye.